Okay, well, here is an episode that it's a very complicated story. One that honestly, yeah, you could probably make this work in a TTRPG rather easily. I mean, it's one of those where it doesn't have a plot that's actually particularly deeply invested in any of the characters. The plot also the complicated part of the plot is that it's a split team plot, but that's really no big deal because of the fact that it's a group of people talking to the Prytt, while one group of people talks to the Kes. And they're really working at the same goal, just from different angles. So, honestly, pretty easy. Easy thing to work on. Alrighty then. So, what exactly happens here? We heal. I'll get back to the plot stuff later, but I'm going to cover almost all of the bases as we go through the slides. So, first up, the aliens of the week live on the planet Kesprytt. One group of aliens is called the Kes, one group of aliens is called the Prytt. No, they don't explain why this is the same as the name of their planet, but it is. Now, the specifics of why exactly they have a deeply hostile geopolitical situation are uncertain. It mentions that official diplomatic contact is not something that they have done recently, but doesn't actually explain why, other than some sort of general paranoia and the fact that the two powers are in fact doing a pretty intense Cold War and doing, espionage to attack each other on a regular basis. Like, it's such a regular basis that one of the Kes guys is like, okay, fine. I'll go talk to our secret agent who happens to be in the same room as your friends. And you're like, okay. I see why the Prytt are so xenophobic and distrustful, because you guys have been constantly doing infiltration bullshit on them. Yeah, that's kind of a problem. Anyway, though, oh yeah, we do see a few cases of looking at their architecture, but it's not particularly interesting. They didn't make any elaborate sets for this. It's all just reuses of stuff that they put to other purposes in other episodes. One of the things you see a lot in the late season TNG is reuses of sets from previous episodes. Well, anyways, now the Kes are in the process of applying for Federation membership. The Prytt think the Kes are applying for Federation membership because they're hoping that the Federation will give them the means to subjugate the Prytt once and for all and unite the planet through military conquest. Yeah, it's that kind of Cold War. So, whether or not this is actually true is not entirely clear in the episode, because the Kes start to suspect that the Federation is somehow affiliated with the Prytt as soon as anything even goes slightly off script. And, it's like, yeah. Anyway, now, the fact that the Kes are actually being considered for entry presumably means that they're a warp-capable civilization who has, in fact, contacted the Federation and not the other way around. And you know, actually, that is one of the things with that, though, is that technically a civilization is not required to actually have warp travel. That's often misquoted. They're required to know about the existence of races on other worlds and have the ability to communicate with them. Warp travel simply makes that a lot easier. Having having subspace radio that is able to talk to Federation ships is actually theoretically enough to be considered a valid candidate for Federation membership. Yes, I know. In the actual episodes, they don't phrase it that way, and they will usually phrase it as warp-capable civilization. Writers, lazy. I know. Shocking. Anyway, so yeah, the Kes. Xenophobic losers who are in a long stalemate with the Prytt. The Prytt are also xenophobic and highly distrustful, and that's the reason why plot happens. They see that a Federation delegate is beaming down to their planet in order to negotiate with the Kes, and they want to know why. So they use what is described in the episode as a tractor beam to redirect the transporter beam so that the delegation, which is actually just Picard and Crusher. I know, a diplomatic mission with Picard and Crusher and no one else. Don't understand that, but that's what they decided to do. I mean, okay, the obvious reason is so that plot can happen and shenanigans later, but in universe, the logic isn't really all that. Anyways, moving on. It is also possible that the Kes wanted a relatively small delegation from the Federation because of the fact that, well, they don't really trust the Federation, so they don't want to have a group of like 12 Starfleet officers beamed down for a diplomatic meeting. Anyways, though, the Prytt managed to capture Picard and Crusher by redirecting the transporter beam. And, given that no one actually managed to get a proper sensor reading of the moment the transporter beam was redirected, they weren't able to figure out exactly where it got redirected to. Just the general vicinity of like, oh yeah, the Prytt were responsible for this. Notably, at this point, there has been no diplomatic contact between the Prytt and the Federation. That does happen eventually because, they don't want to shoot the Prytt because the Prytt haven't actually done anything worth being shot for at this point. Which, anyways, so the race. The Kesprytt are actually a very, very generic humanoid race. Like, nothing's particularly interesting about the way they look. The slight wrinkle on the forehead is largely the same in all members of the race. I mean, minor deviations, but nothing significant. Also, the physical appearances of the Kes and the Prytt are basically the same. The way they dress is different, and yeah, that's not much. So, Federation membership for this race, we really don't actually understand what. See, there is actually a discussion at the beginning of the episode about whether or not Federation membership actually requires a planet to be a single political entity in order to become a member. And Canonically, that's not actually ever been established. Even this episode doesn't establish whether that's actually a requirement. However, as this episode does establish, the Kes do probably have an ulterior motive for wanting to be a Federation membership, so that they would have the ability to get resources to conquer the Prytt. I mean, that's what the Prytt believe. The Kes aren't going to willingly admit to it. But it does seem likely that the long-standing power struggle is probably related to this whole thing. Now, one thing that would be interesting is doing a negotiation where you actually have both the Kes and the Prytt get admitted to the Federation. Obviously, this would have as a stipulation that the two of them stop fighting each other. But, you know, they don't necessarily need to be a single political entity from a legalistic perspective in universe. Like I said, it was never actually established in any episode that a world has to have a single government in order to become a member. However, becoming a Federation member so that you can conquer the rest of your planet is a hard no. Anyways, which, yeah, Prytt Security Ministry. These guys are actually pretty interesting people, because like I said, these are the guys who came up with the idea of using a transporter beam to or redirecting a transporter beam with a tractor beam. How exactly they pulled that trick off is something that even the people in the episode are kind of shocked about. And the fact that they actually managed to get it to they managed to redirect it to a specific location at that. Interesting stuff. Also, it's not the first time that the crew of the Enterprise had used the Enterprise's transporters, going from the ship. Well, okay, they went from the ship down to the planet more than once at this point, I think. I'm not 100% sure about that, actually. Still, though, again, there is, of course, the possibility that the Prytt actually had a man on the inside telling them the exact time and location that the transport was going to happen, thus allowing the team running the tractor beam to know the exact moment they would need to fire the tractor beam. Still a heck of a feat. Anyways, so they don't actually demonstrate a particularly interesting technology. However, they do demonstrate that on a technological level, they're maybe somewhat less advanced than the Federation, but not drastically so. Like, they have tricorders, they have phaser pistols, they have these things. The Psi-wave device is a cranial implant that allows the device to broadcast your brain waves. Now, the hilarious side story with this is that you have Crusher and Picard set up so that their devices are constantly broadcasting the brain waves to each other. Now, in theory, the reason that they were implanted with these devices is so that the Prytt could literally read their minds and record in a computer what they know about the Kes. And the goal behind doing this was to determine whether or not the Federation was planning to help the Kes attack the Prytt. Which, quite frankly, is, well, somewhat paranoid. Kind of reasonable. They're not doing like torture or anything like that. It's only mildly unpleasant because it causes having the brain waves go like in and out kind of causes nausea or something. But that's about it. Doesn't really go farther than that. Also, Crusher mentioned something about how she can't just, break the device or yank it off because it's attached to the brain. They don't actually show in the episode just how deep the device goes, but it's said to be directly connected to your brain. And if you did, yank it out, could be serious injury as a result, which is part of the reason why Crusher decided not to attempt to remove it in the field. She was worried that she might cause serious injury. Anyways, yeah, it's like it's not something difficult to remove. It's just, you need carefully prepared tools and so on. Alrighty then. So, oh yeah, this isn't one of the episodes where we have Alyssa Ogawa do stuff because since Picard and the chief medical officer are away, they need someone on the ship to have talk about medical stuff. And realistically, the TNG cast only actually has 2 people who are regular medical personnel, Dr. Crusher and Ogawa. I mean, as one of the people who is technically not main cast, she has a lot more appearances than anyone else. Like, that's the simplest way I could think of to access. Like, very regularly recurring character who's technically not main cast. Because of the fact that anytime Crusher is not the medical officer they are using for something medical, it usually ends up being Ogawa. All right, Markson is someone that Crusher mentioned as someone she thought Ogawa might be dating in this episode. I have to say, from a side story sort of perspective, talking about the other characters, it works. Went absolutely nowhere, and he was completely forgotten after this episode. Also, from an in-universe perspective, Crusher was speculating, which it could be that Crusher was absolutely wrong. All right. Also, we have a whole bunch of minor characters that show up in this episode as members of either the Kes or the Prytt civilizations. Most of them are unnamed background characters who show up and do alien stuff for alien reasons. One of the things that was highly notable about this episode is that the ambassador from the Kes actually had quarters set up on the Enterprise that he deemed, adequate security. And, this is part of that. He brought, their security monitoring stuff to the Enterprise so they could make sure it was safe. Notable here is that note how all of these Prytt characters have that head sock sort of clothing. This actually does look like a uniform. Why exactly they have this uniform? I mean, it probably has something to do with the fact that they want to avoid having the Kes, sneak in and do stuff or what have you. Because again, this is a civilization that has transporter technology. Like, the Kes and the Prytt both have the knowledge of building working transporters and use them in the episode. Because, that's actually how Picard and Crusher get back to the Enterprise, is that someone in the Prytt government just, it's like, okay, fine, beam them back to their ship. Bye. Yeah, that's how they get back to the ship, is that the Prytt just beam them back. And it uses a Prytt teleporter, not the Enterprise's. Again, really interesting plot twist. Now, we have the 2 main most important members of the Aliens of the Week. Mauric. Mauric is the guy who is the lead of the Kes delegation. He is actually an ambassador, not his faction's head, but, he was specifically chosen to discuss the matter of joining the Federation with Picard and his crew. He's also the guy who accuses Riker of being in league with the Prytt when Picard and Crusher have their teleport get redirected into Prytt territory. Yeah. Yeah. This does not go anywhere good. And his behavior is a large part of the reason why Picard is like, actually, no, I'm going to tell the Federation Council to tell you guys to kiss off and stay at home. And as I mentioned before, we have no reason to believe that these guys actually have a worthwhile space fleet, so we aren't actually expecting them to bother Federation space. Now, this does seem like the sort of race that might have dealings with the Star Trek equivalent of free traders. Those people like that you see in all of the episodes where they're some minor race that just does an honest day's work for an honest day's wage or something like that, and isn't affiliated with any of the major powers. Yeah. The Kes and the Prytt definitely seem like the sort of people who would have dealings with alien races like that. Again, it's a technologically advanced civilization that actually has highly advanced technology for a planet that seemingly has no space navy. Do they actually have some sort of space navy? I don't have any reason to believe they do, but given their technology, it seems likely that they probably have some sort of spaceships. However, due to the nature of their conflict, they are either not actually fighting each other using spaceships or something. That part doesn't get explained. Although there is apparently a starbase in orbit of the planet. I think that's what that thing was. Anyway. This is the security minister of the Prytt. This is the person who eventually decides, like, okay, fine, we're going to be nice to the Federation and do our best to, be ingratiating to them and not antagonize them any more than we already have already. Because, quite frankly, like I mentioned before, the Prytt think the Federation and the Kes are in an alliance so that the Kes can conquer the Prytt. Obviously, if you're the Prytt Security Minister, you have a very good reason to not like that idea. So, yeah. She is in some way responsible for the Psi-wave devices being implanted into Picard and Crusher, but she's also the person who beams them back to the Enterprise at the end of the episode. And also, they diplomatically argue about why she should beam them back. So she doesn't just give them back because she's convinced they're telling the truth. No, she deeply distrusts them even after using the Psi-wave devices. Oh wait, that's right. If I remember, Picard and Crusher left the prison area where they were supposed to be detained before the Prytt actually downloaded the information out of the Psi-wave devices. So she didn't actually get the information she wanted that would have given her reason to believe that the Federation is actually innocent of the charges which were presented. So the fact that she doesn't have that information gives her a reason, and the fact that Picard and Crusher escaped gives her a reason to suspect that the Kes actually do have, something. Anyway, though, at the end of the episode, no one dies. That's an interesting thing with this episode. It's actually an episode where no one gets killed. Yeah, Picard and Crusher get kidnapped by the Prytt, and that's the worst thing that happens in this episode. It's all a bunch of diplomatic posturing and talking and so on and so forth, and nothing particularly scary actually happens. It's more about people threatening to do scary things. I do have to say, it was a great way of doing a dive into an alien culture. And, that's something that's a lot of fun. And, having players do something like this, sure. I mean, as I've mentioned in several previous ones, I wouldn't copy it word for word. But, the idea of having one continent where one group of people lives on a planet at a different continent with a different group of people, and one of the groups of people is applying for Federation membership. Also, it's very much like the Antikins and the Psi-wave. Granted, the Antikins and Psi-wave are not races which actually live on the same planet. However, they do live close enough to each other that they are constantly at war with each other, and they decided they wanted to apply for Federation membership. Presumably because if only one of them becomes a Federation member, that one that became a Federation member will get additional support that they could use to win the war. Of course, this is the reason why the Antikins and the Psi-wave didn't have their memberships get approved. They were basically told, like, we could admit we could admit you, however, you have to knock off the war. And they didn't like that idea. Which is basically the same thing we came with here, is that, they get told, like, no, we're not going to approve your Federation membership when you are these people who are being sneaky and not being honest with us about why you want Federation membership. And yeah, that's kind of a deal breaker. Anyway, though, that's another thing about this that I didn't mention earlier. This is not the first time the Federation have had contact with this race. This is not a first contact situation. It's kind of like what Lower Decks calls a second contact situation. It's actually more like an official diplomatic visit after second contact, I guess. We don't actually know anything about how the Kes submitted an application to the Federation to become a member. But they did. That's all we know, that they did. And yeah, that's a good enough point to end it. Lots of fun stuff in the episode, and it's an episode about problem solving and not about shooting things. Although having players do this, they might end up shooting things instead of sticking to problem solving. Hard to say for sure. Alrighty, see you guys later.